The first ever museum I visited as a kid was probably the Orlando Science Center when I was about 8 or 9, maybe even 7 years old. It's mainly a planetarium and observation center, and covers a lot of like science objects and science exploration. Um, but leading up to the theater, I remember going to the main IMAX where they would show like space exploration movies and maybe the occasional like Sakara Tomb showing. Sometimes even laser shows. There'd be right there behind glass a big stone. And I remember it being on the plaque, it said Rosetta Stone. And as a kid, I was amazed that when reading it and the history, when it was explained on the stone, um, like that this was the first example of, hieroglyphs being translated into other languages, and that this was such a key part of history. And I remember asking my mom during that, like, is this real? That's crazy that we have this here, like at the Orlando Science Center, in the bottom, like, floor of this dingy, like, kind of like hallway leading to the museum, leading to the theater. And I remember her being like, "Yeah, of course it's real. Of course that's like a real stone." I don't think she understood the question, but I remember taking in that answer and being just like amazed in this moment of like awe and in hindsight, kind of like dumb innocence. But it was really exciting to me that at the moment it felt so real. The stone is dated to approximately 196 BCE and is thought to have been inscribed by a council of priests at Memphis on behalf of King Ptolemy V. Over time, it was, slowly eroded and covered up. And the most common story on how it was uncovered was that in July of 1799, in the modern city of El Rashid, but then called Rosetta by the French, during the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt, French soldiers uncovered it while trying to build various barricades and fortifications. The find was credited to be uncovered by Officer Pierre-Francois Bouchard, and it's stated on the American Research Center in Egypt's site that he immediately recognized the significance of the juxtaposed Greek and hieroglyphic scripts, and correctly predicted that each script represented a translation of a single text. At the time of inscription during the Ptolemaic period, the Egyptian population at the time was treated as a sort of second-class citizen by the Greek rulers, imperialists. And during that time, the economy was suffering because of Ptolemaic wars. The decree was supposed to be a confirmation of Ptolemy V's legitimacy and his commitment to the Egyptian people. When it was uncovered during the Napoleonic Wars, it was taken, and during the 19th century, when many scholars and Egyptologists were entrenched in Egyptian pseudo-mysticism, the mystery and intrigue of the Rosetta Stone and the possibilities of translating these hieroglyphs became a sort of arms race against and across multiple fields of cryptologists and linguists. English physician and physicist Thomas Young was one of the first scholars who was particularly interested in deciphering the text, as well as his main rival, which was a French philologist, which was Jean-Francois Champollion. And both of them contributed significantly in trying to decipher the Rosetta Stone. British scholar Thomas Young was credited to first identify the cartouches on the Rosetta Stone, to identify that those were rulers' names, and then worked out the sounds of some of those hieroglyphs. And then later Champollion, because of his Coptic knowledge, expanded on those observations and began to decipher the hieroglyphic script and made an alphabet, a phonetic alphabet of these hieroglyphs that other scholars began to also use to try to translate the other inscriptions. So it was initially uncovered in 1799 in the Napoleonic context by these militarists, and then it was taken to England in 1802 as part of a peace treaty between France and Britain. The stone is seen as a symbol of Egypt's cultural heritage, and there's a lot of contention as to whether it being taken in this context, it being theft from Egypt. Over the years, the British Museum has refused to return the stone to Egypt, and it being based on the argument that it was acquired legally in its context and is an integral part of world heritage. So in that argument, it should be presented in the British Museum to reach a wider audience, perhaps. The controversy surrounding the Rosetta Stone, though, is not limited to its ownership. The translation itself has been a subject of debate, as the decipherment of these hieroglyphs is thought of to be a significant achievement in the history of linguistics as a whole, and the disagreement over who should be credited with this triumph has been a subject of debate between countries for quite a long time. The Rosetta Stone's current residence in the British Museum goes to show a legacy of imperial ambitions in England and in France, and their struggle to establish the colonial empires they sought to in the 18th and 19th century. You can see a testament to these conflicts as graffiti that's been painted on the sides of the Rosetta Stone that say, captured in Egypt by the British Army in 1801, as well as presented by King George III. Egypt at the time, during the 1790s, was a part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was pinned between these two competing political figureheads and powers. Napoleon's invasion in 1798, its discovery in 1799, and the subsequent Napoleonic defeat by the British and Ottoman forces in 1801 are in a way depicted on this material object. The stone was officially turned over to the British in the Treaty of Alexandria in 1801, and the following year was accessioned by the British Museum under the registration number BMEA24. Since then, it's remained on a nearly continuous display. The royal edict depicted on the stone is sometimes referred to as the Memphis Decree, because at the time of the Ptolemy V, Memphis was the traditional capital city of Egypt. And at the time of the decree, Memphis had been pretty much overtaken economically by Alexandria. The decree itself is attested on several other material objects from the elephant, and certain passages are also paralleled in the Stela of Nobire. This particular stone seems to have a special significance due to the place and context in which it was discovered, particularly during which the Napoleonic forces were overtaken by the Ottoman and British powers. In a way, this material object has been transformed as a sort of totem to Britain's power in the 19th century. And the fact that it is still on display and has been on continuous display since says something as to the nature of the British Museum as a whole, as well as Britain's influence, especially in painting a picture of world history, as well as archaeology, and the representation of material objects. Let's take a moment to tour this wing of the British Museum, where the Rosetta Stone is housed currently. On the entry plaque of this wing, it states that the ancient Egyptian civilization lasted for over 3,000 years. Most of the evidence that survives today comes from temples and tombs, which were built to last. This gallery includes some of the British Museum's best known and spectacular objects, including colossal statues of Egypt's greatest kings and the famous Rosetta Stone. The objects are laid out chronologically. They date from the Old Kingdom to the Roman period. Take a moment to observe and take in anything that you may notice from this wing. Notice what's directly behind the Rosetta Stone. Also notice what is directly in front of the Rosetta Stone. Consider the context of the placement of the stone in the wing and its implications. A feature that was particularly striking to me in this wing tour was the sheer amount of merchandising and souvenirs that were available, as well as the donation boxes to the British Museum. I hadn't considered the sheer amount of income and profits that the British Museum makes in merchandising the various artifacts that it displays. One of Egypt's primary income sources is its tourism sector. This is a crucial source of income for the Egyptian economy. According to Tourism Minister Ahmed Issa, during an event that marked the 200th anniversary of Egyptology, Ahmed stated that Egyptian antiquities are one of the most important tourism assets that Egypt possesses, which distinguishes it from tourist destinations worldwide. It's fascinating to think about the sheer amount of profits that the British Museum takes in from it housing the Rosetta Stone. And due to the amount of merchandising that seems to be available at the kiosks entering the wing that houses the Rosetta Stone, it seems like these souvenirs are an indication to the popularity of the stone itself, and a testament to the ability for this artifact to bring in income for the museum. This makes me wonder how much profit the British Museum really makes on these souvenirs and merchandising of material objects that were taken from various countries, and the economic implications they could have on these countries, especially in the context of Egypt, in which tourism is one of its primary sectors that boosts its economy. There have been multiple pushes throughout the years for repatriation and the return of the Rosetta Stone to Egypt. One of the most recent calls for the return of the Rosetta Stone was in 2022, spearheaded by Monica Hanna, who is the acting dean of the College of Archaeology in Aswan. This online campaign amassed over 2,500 signatures. In the petition, it stated that the stone is a symbol of cultural violence. The stone is a symbol of cultural imperialism. In a statement from Hanna, it stated that there are hopes with this petition that the increasing cultural change in the ethical code of museums would help their cause, as there has been increasing moves by various Western museums to repatriate and restitute and return artifacts that were removed from their mother countries under colonialist and imperialist rules. Hanna stated that restituting the stone is a symbol of changing things. We're no longer in the 19th century, but we're working on an ethical code of the 21st century. As of today, there's been no formal request from the Egyptian government for the return of the Rosetta Stone. The official response from the British Museum is that The British Museum greatly values positive collaborations with colleagues across Egypt. Currently, the British Museum has a site on their page, specifically regarding the contested objects from their collection. On the contested objects page from the British Museum, there's a variety of classes of material artifacts that are presented, but not specifically the Rosetta Stone. On the page, the British Museum attempts to explain how these objects have been acquired in a variety of ways. It's interesting to consider the implications of presenting these objects on a contested objects page from the collection. Is this just another means of advertising these objects and or mentioning these objects without, in fact, addressing the issue itself? And further digging on the page and seeing the subpage in which they address the methods in which certain material objects have been acquired over the years since its initial 1753 collection, we find the conflict subcategory, which the Rosetta Stone would fall under. On this page it states that the British Museum acknowledges the difficult histories of some of its collections, including the contested means by which some collections have been acquired, such as through military action and its consequences. In addressing this, the British Museum states that the British Museum is actively engaged in re-examining the acquisition histories of such collections and caring for them with appropriate respect, in close dialogue with the colleagues and partners from countries around the world. Is the reframing of the presentation of these objects as partnerships and these countries as colleagues simply a means to sort of redirect the issue in and of itself? The British Museum continues to state about its commitment to partnership and commitment to investigation of these collections. But there doesn't seem to be any sort of actual push or motivation from the British Museum to truly repatriate and or return these objects to their countries of origin. Instead, it seems like the reframing and use of the term partnership is another way to reinstate the power imbalance that historically has existed